Well, thank you very much for joining us on Drucker TV. I'm delighted to say that we're now joined by Frau Dr. Brigitte Mohn of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, an important organization that has been doing great work and good work for many years, and I think very much in the spirit of the Global Peter Drucker Forum. And that's why we're delighted to have Brigitte Mohn with us today. Hello, Brigitte. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted.
Now, I mentioned the Bertelsmann Stiftung. Of course, it's a big organization that requires management and leadership, also in that Drucker spirit. Perhaps you could start by telling us about what some of the key decisions have been, perhaps in the past, in the growth of the Stiftung. What have been the key concerns, and what have been perhaps the difficult decisions that you've had to take along the way?
I think it was the experience that collaboration within Germany and in Europe and around the world is always the alliance of public-private partnerships. So I think none of the civil sector, private sector, or the governmental sector can solve problems by itself. So we always have to collaborate to really address the big problems, if it's peace or innovation or developing the societal structures, has to really come together. And I think that's one of the challenges that the civil sector has to innovate the dialogue with these other partners and get the financing and the blended financing attempt together to really scale solutions, not only within the countries, but as well in other areas or in other nations to really understand how we can build new value chains. And the private sector plays a very big role in this, and the third sector, at least here in Europe and in Germany, is not always involved in this innovational structure process.
Well, thank you. As you indicate, you're very broadly based in your activities through politics, academia, business, and civil society. This means collaboration and cooperation must, I suppose, are at the heart of the challenge, the task for the Stiftung. Perhaps you could tell us about one or two examples where you have been at the center of a network or of a process of cooperation and collaboration, and what the impact of that has been.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think within the pandemic experience the last couple of years, we saw that none of us can really solve this big problem alone. And in Germany, we started a huge movement in the public-private sector to work together with more than 700 organizations helping refugees and people from the Ukraine and other countries to really be taking, helping them to arrive in the communities, get the civil services, start getting access to the labor market, to the healthcare market. And we see that this finding the vaccine and getting the healthcare implementation plans in the various countries can only work cross-border, right? And I think we see this in other areas, for example, like climate change as well. That's something we have to solve together. And we see that we need the political frameworks to really work together in that areas and find the solution, especially for countries who are in like the global south or other countries where we know that we depend on each other. So I think foundations, especially as our foundation, as we're a family foundation, that we have always taken the longer term perspective, that we're neutral, and that we are always our platform of convening powers to start the dialogue transnational or transsectoral. And I think that's something that we learned over the time it always takes very long to implement change in societies. And I think as we have no political mandate per se, it's always an intangible asset of leadership, which I believe is the new normal for the next generations, as well in the business sector and in the civil sector and in the governmental sector as well.
Thank you. It's fascinating. And I'm sure many of our business leaders listening will be very familiar with some of the issues that you describe, and they apply to organizations of size, whichever sector, whether they are for profit or not for profit. Perhaps you could just say a little more about, the leadership qualities that in particular are required to lead these complicated collaborations and corporations when you're cross-border in different parts of society. What kind of leadership qualities are needed today, do you think?
I think you have to like people. It's very simple, and you can't learn it at an MBA school. It's a rounded personality development that has to be basically learned and experienced on the ground. And I think you always have to take two sides. It's not only the business side, you always have to see what's the impact on society, what we are doing, and how do you basically transfer what you're doing into system change. And I think that is something very new for, let's say, the startup ecosystem, right? If you say climate tech, it has huge impact on the environment in a system change approach. And I think in a wider aspect, involving and participating for this societal change, you need the business knowledge to really get the people, the customers, the citizens and population on your side to understand what's happening. Because what we see right now, that science and the business leaders and innovators are not collaborating together with the public, right, to really understand where we can drive change and how can we be the enabler for societies to be part of the solution process when you're saying zero hunger or changing the food industry or getting sustainable fashion. And that has a lot to do with consumer behavior. So I think these alignment across nations and sectors is super important to really get this educational process going. And therefore, we need different educated business people who are the leaders of the next generation, who really understand how you can impact system with what you're doing in a business.
And when you talk about next generation, of course, in education, this also implies there are cultural concerns. And I think the Stiftung has been very active, for example, with your Neue Stimmen singing competition, the Liz Mohn Foundation for Culture and Music. Perhaps you could tell us briefly about some of your cultural activities, because as you implied, this is a broad-based requirement of people to be culturally aware as well as commercially aware.
Yes, I think what's really important is we had the religious monitor and we had the social value index and many other aspects, as well as singing, as it really bridges all the different ethnic groups and cultures and religious groups. It always brings people together and everybody understands the voice of music, right, in all the various areas in the world. And I think it's the bridging attempt that with music, even in difficult times, you can unite people again, and you can bring peace and a different understanding of cultural synergies and cultural, how do you say this, community building efforts. And we just do this with an organization at COP28 where the Pope will be there and the Imam. And I think it's very important to say that when you really want to do something for the environment and basically protecting our living here on Earth, cultural is always an overarching understanding of common ground and really keeping together communities and seeing what is our value framework worldwide, even though we have differences and we have different languages and cultural backgrounds, we are willing to unite in an effort to really protect our home here.
Hmm. Well, that's culture, which goes deep and is perhaps comes from tradition. Let's quickly think about the future and much discussed technological change. Of course, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We just had a big event in just outside London at Bletchley Park. What are your
Yes.
thoughts about the new technology and AI, and how does that affect the work of the Bertelsmann Stiftung?
We are just building a new program that's called Digitalization and AI for the Common Good. I think that's exactly what we have to do. I mean, you can use it for the good and the bad, but I think the general idea is how can you use it for the common good and how do you use science to really develop into a sustainable world, right? And I think if you use, for example, AI solving the SDG problems where we don't see so much movement, but I think that's a common ground. We in the later whatever decades we will see more and more. It's, for example, like where do you get access to water and food? How can you basically use AI for risk assessments or for refugee movements coming out of this, or for protecting communities against certain climate change effects we're already seeing everywhere around the world? And how can we basically use AI to really spearhead the innovation in the different regions and use it for achieving the SDG goals? I think that's crucial. And right now, the financial markets are not really investing into these strategic lines, and we need the financial markets to support, for example, like young companies in climate tech or other areas for supply chains and everything like this to really spearhead the innovational part, for example, like in India or in Latin America or in Africa.
It's the future. It's very important, and I think Peter Drucker said that every social issue, every big challenge, whether it's climate or socially, is also perhaps an opportunity for business people to engage constructively and even profitably. And of course, it turns out that your father was even in correspondence with Peter Drucker 20 years ago when he in California, and we discovered some correspondence between the two of them. He was clearly a big fan of Drucker.
Yes, I think he learned a lot and they actually really met. And I think that was amazing. It was always that you give, and I think they're both very much aligned. And you see this in many young people right now coming from the next gen business community. It's the attitude to let people take over responsibility and participate in the change process. I think that's
Hmm.
what it is. And it's intergenerational, intercultural effort, and we see this especially with young people. Take like the Noah Forum in Zurich, or DLD, or Slash, or all these big conferences and summits around the world, like Senkalp in India and in Africa, where we see that the social mission-driven businesses, with the expectation of a great return, they start really understanding that it has to be a strategic alignment with long-term outcomes for societies. And I think that's great because that what was my father always, and I think Peter Drucker, they always understood that the private sector is part of the solution driving change in societies.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Well, clearly, Bertelsmann Stiftung is also mission driven. You have learned a lot. But lastly, final thought today: when you look to the future, has there been a number one lesson, a biggest lesson of the experience of the Stiftung, or any thoughts about the future? I hope there is some realistic optimism there, as well as the concerns that we see every day in the newspapers.
Yes, I think the serious concern is that we miss the efforts of peace building structures. And we really hope that we get a new peace and world order. We had the Salzburg Trialogue this year, where Sean Cleary outlined one of these world order concepts that we hopefully discuss in a broader sense. And I think that's very clear that we need this. And in a positive way, if there's a lot of movement around the world, people start to understand that they have to listen to each other and start the dialogue again. And I think that's what you see that's necessary in many respects right now in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Frau Dr. Mohn, for your time today. We certainly had a good dialogue, I think, and I was very grateful for your time, and thank you for joining us at the Global Peter Drucker Forum.
Thank you so much, and I wish you a wonderful discussion there. Thank you so much.